Welcome back to the Skid Factory. This is our latest project car. This is an R32 Skyline. It's a 1993 model. It's a four-door version. It's not a GDR, so calm down. It's just an R32 Skyline. There's lots of them made. 60,000 of them were GDRs, probably 200,000 of them weren't. So there's plenty of those in Australia. This originally came out with an RB20 DET, so a 2-litre straight six. Related to the GDR engine, but about half as powerful and not that impressive. This car belongs to our mate Matt, who provides us with a lot of assistance along the way with all our builds. He's a metal fabricator. He's had this car for 15 years. I've never known him to own any other car, and I've known him for that long. So it was his second vehicle, and he's never replaced it. So he's pretty much in love with the thing. He drives it to work every single day for the last 15 years, and it gets around a bit. So a few years ago, the RB20 expired from a bit of a mishap. So at the time, we gave him a bit of a hand to revive it so he could keep driving it to work. And what we did was fitted a VQ30 Nissan V6 to it, which is was a Japanese engine fitted to Laurels and some other big luxury cars. So it's actually a factory turbo engine, although it is related to the Maxima front-wheel drive variant. So actually a pretty good engine. This is the engine here. It's since died, but we'll get to that. So we fitted that engine right back against the firewall with a Z32 5-speed box, turbo box, with an adapter plate. Matt made his own manifolding, made his own inlet plenum. It's got a GT35 twin scroll turbo on it and a couple of wastegates. It was actually a pretty good thing. It made about 420 horsepower at the wheels on 98 fuel, which is US 93, not E85. And Matt did about 70,000 kilometres driving it to work every day for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. It was running like a charm until we went to the Queensland MCM Nats, and he was out racing all the other cars there. Pushed it a bit too hard, and one of the bearings decided to spin around in the wrong spot on the crank. So got a big rod knock, shut it down. We towed it home, pulled it apart, had a look. It wasn't pretty. We said, oh, maybe we'll just chuck another motor in it. They're actually not that easy to get anymore. They used to be 2 for $1 back in the day, but people had no interest in the engine for some reason. I don't know why, because they're a great engine. They're better than an RB. But no manual gearbox option was a problem for them. So they've actually dried up, and finding another one wasn't easy. So we talked it over with Matt, and he was expressing his concern of being beaten by some of the turbo V8s that were down at the MCM Nats. So we decided we would go a different way with it and going for a turbo V8, which is a bit of a theme on the show so far. So that's what we're going to do. When you're doing an engine conversion, you have to think about what the purpose of the car is for a start, and that sort of will decide what sort of engine and how you lay the engine out, especially when you're turbocharging it. So this car, as well as being Matt's daily driver, previously was his daily driver, he also uses it for motorsport events. He races it in autocross and that sort of thing, and he wants to do a lot more of that. It's probably a bit more circuit racing as well. If he chose to keep it as a daily driver, we're actually looking at Nissan V8s, VH 45 or 41. We had a bit of a look around for them. They're pretty rare. Like, I've done a few of them before, but they're not that easy to come across. Also, manual gearbox options are a pain, and we're getting sick of doing bloody gearbox conversions on every car that we build. So he's decided he's just going to come up with a daily to drive to work now and keep this as more of a track car. So with that in mind, we decided we'll probably go for an LS engine because they are a pretty straightforward fit into the chassis. They come with a big, strong T56 gearbox. The engines are strong. There's tons of them in Australia. They've got the right sump on the right, on the sump wheels on the correct end for the R32 chassis. Can turbo them, they love it. Good power, 650 horsepower at the wheels, reliably is a thing with them. You can buy parts off the shelf, clutches and that sort of thing. So that's what's going in there. Sounds like a bit of a cliche, but the reason why everyone puts LSs in cars is because they are a good engine and they are quite compact and they are easy to fit in multiple chassis. Here's our trusty LS1 engine. This is out of a VX Commodore, which is similar in American terms to a GTO Pontiac. So it's a front sump version, which is actually specifically designed for the Australian car back in about 1997 to allow us to fit it. So it's got some pretty wacky oil filter sort of stuff going on inside the sump. There's all pipes and stuff to transfer the oil around so the oil filter can be in the front instead of the back. It's a reasonably low kilometre unit. It's probably got about 200,000 Ks on it, which is not much for an old car like that. We got this from Benny. He picked it up out of a crashed car and just about the right time, pretty much sealed the deal on doing the LS conversion. So Benny pulled it all out and freighted it up to us, ready to go in. So here's our LS1 front sump. It's got the oil filter in the front here. It's actually got a bunch of pipes running inside that go back to the block because the oil galleries run through the block. So normally your oil filter's here on the original design, which with the sump well at the back. So it's specifically made for the car, the Commodore. So this is good at the front. The only problem is to get it back far enough for it to fit nicely in the car, in this particular vehicle, we've got to cut out a section around about that big, right through. And we're just going to weld in a piece of angle aluminium there. And that'll allow the cross member in the Skyline to come further in to here. So we can push it back against the firewall enough. It just makes the gear stick line up properly in the hole. It just fits better when it's like that. So that's no big deal. It just needs a good clean up. We'll pull it off and put it in a hot wash. Chop her up. The sumps, generally speaking, I've welded them before. They weld really nice, so there's no dramas there. We'll get rid of these mounts, big floppy mounts. Just use cotton reel mounts as usual, just for reasons we've spoken about before. This starter motor is a problem with the Skylines and the Silvias. The steering is about there. So a lot of the time people just get rid of that and put a left-hand starter conversion kit on them. We're going to try not to do that because they're bloody expensive. They're about $1,000, 800 to 1,000. We may be able to get away with using a rotatable starter, which pushes the solenoid. You can just roll the solenoid around up into here. We're just going to try and use a bit of engineering now instead of spending money, because we don't like spending money if we don't have to. That's more money to spend on turbos and stuff.
That mount's seen some better days, eh?
Perfect, workable order. So I've taken the sump in and thrown it in the dishwasher at Old Cox. It's like a big industrial thing that cleans all the crap off this. We had a hard time with this one because it hasn't had the most oil changes in the world, but it's cleaned it up enough for us to give it a final clean for when we cut it out to weld the piece in. Matt's on his way with the folding. We're going to weld it in there. Matt's going to be working on the car all the time. He's taking a couple of weeks off. He's obviously a fabricator and that sort of thing, so he can do a lot of the work himself. So that's good to go once we cut it up. That's the power steering hard line that sits on the engine like that. Cut off the bit of flexible hose that was on there and silver soldered a AN fitting onto there so we can connect it to the rack. The rack was previously, it already had a hydraulic, AN hydraulic line on it, so we'll just reuse that. So that's good to go. Onto the engine bay. It's a reasonable size engine bay. It's had a fairly long straight six in it. The problem with the LS engine is, as we talked about before, the starter motor and the rack. This also had hydraulic high cast, which is like a four-wheel steering system that doesn't work very well at all and has about $5,000 worth of hydraulic lines and hoses and modules and shit running it. It's absolutely useless, and there probably wouldn't be one on the road that still has it, because when it doesn't work anymore, which is all of them, it's really dangerous. It actually tries to throw you off the road. This has got a massive rack tower on it with bloody hydraulic lines. It used to have some other lines over here and a big module here. We're actually going to replace that rack with an S15 rack it's just a normal steering rack, and it's a lot more compact than that. Reason for that is we've got starter motor here, and we're going to have a dump pipe run through there. It's not going to be possible with that steering rack, so the S15 will make it so we can actually fit the dump pipe through there as well. It's all pretty much a bolt-in, as the Nissans are pretty much Lego. You can just unbolt things and bolt other things in, more or less. So we'll get stuck into that next and chop up the sump, then we can throw the engine and box in and start looking at engine mounts. We're going to unpick this panel here. As you can see, it's got like a lap joint there with some spot welds. We're going to unpick that and make that a bolt-on item. That makes it heaps easier to run a engine and gearbox assembly in, so you don't have to go like that and bash it into things and dint engine bays and that sort of thing. You can just sort of walk it straight in. So yeah, that's a good trick if you can do that. Take that centre support panel out. This is good because they've already lapped it over for us. If you have to cut it through, one thing you can do is go to a wrecker, scrapyard, whatever, and cut that bit out, cut it through there, and then come back to your own vehicle and cut it through and make your own lap joint, and then you can just bolt it back on again. It does make it a lot easier when you're doing custom conversions like this. So I'll just wait for Matt to get here and get stuck into it. Hey man.
Got some panels.
Did you sleep in or something?
Thanks. Nah, working man.
As Al mentioned, Matt is a metal fabricator by trade and is an absolute wizard when it comes to anything metal. The sump is marked and a section cut out of the well so that a folded piece of alloy sheet can then be cut to size and welded in, giving us extra clearance for when we mount the motor in the engine bay. What's your thoughts on having someone else to do the work for you, Al?
Good, as long as he does it right.
While Matt is busy welding up the sump, Al jumps into swapping over the steering rack. The standard R32 high-cast rack is removed and thrown in the bin, and an S15 Sylvia steering rack is fitted, which has a much smaller rack head and gives us a lot more clearance for the starter motor and exhaust.
As I said before, we're going to knock this radiator support top panel off. So it's got a few spot welds in it. To find out where the spot welds are, you can see a couple of them, but sometimes they're hard to find. So you just got to buzz them off with a sander or something just so you can see them. And you can see one there and another one there. I can see that one there, that's pretty deep, and there's another one on the opposite side. So we're just going to drill through those, pop that off, put it to side, do all our engine fitting, then refit it. We're going to paint the engine bay anyway because it's pretty grubby, so it's all going to get a respray afterwards. Just mark a bit on that one. Weld up all right, bro?
Yeah, man, pretty sweet. Just hope I haven't bowed. That looks pretty straight. Looks all good.
So I got to put some oil drains in it now. I don't know if I mentioned it, but we're putting twin turbos on this just because. So we're going to put 2 oil drains in it. So they're going to be up the front, the turbos, so we're going to put them as far forward as we can, which is about where Matt's holding that fitting now. Dash 10 drains, one on either side. So we're just going to do drill and tap, 3/8 NPT. The reason we're not welding them on is because if you weld them on and something bumps into them and damages the 37-degree flare, you got to cut it off and do it again. So if you screw them in, you don't have to worry about that. Our trusty old T56. It's pretty much the same boxes you'll find in the early Camaros. First ones have the LS1. The difference is it's got this weird shifter on it, which is actually a kind of a relocator that they've made for the Australian car to put the shifter where it's meant to be. So we have to get rid of that because it's going to be too far back in the car. So it actually just unbolts and you can get a direct fit stick. We can also use Camaro stuff if we change a small piece inside the box that's got to be changed as well. So we'll make up our mind which one we want to use. Doesn't really make much difference. It's just probably a few more available when it comes to Camaro stuff. So we'll rip that off, toss it in the bin. We're going to bolt the box up to the engine and swing it in for the first time and have a look and see what fits where.
With the Sump now modified, the T56 gearbox is bolted onto the engine and then slid into the Skyline engine bay.
What's the vibe, Al?
I'm just going to cut a tab off the top of the gearbox that's hitting the tunnel. These T56s have got knobs and brackets and crap hanging off them everywhere. So the engine box fits in there really well. We already pretty much knew that because I've done it before. We want to move the engine back a little bit, so we've got a bit of contact here. I'm just going to put a little ding in the tunnel there, just to allow it to go back a little bit further and probably over to that side a little bit more, because to give us a bit more starter clearance. Then we're just going to we're going to lift the engine up a little bit more and just get that sump up a bit higher, because as you can see, they're a bit vulnerable. So we spent the last hour just moving the engine around, adjusting it a little bit, putting a few more wedges under it, dinging the tunnel a little bit to clear the box even more. Most of what we're doing, we're looking for starter motor clearance, which is not easy to get, but we don't really want to spend $1,000 on a starter relocation kit when you don't need to. We reckon we've pretty much got it in the right place now. We've got enough starter clearance. It's going to be virtually solid mounted via shackle bushes as usual, so the engine's not going to move. It's mainly the actual steering shaft rotating around the universal that we've got to clear. We've got the engine offset a little bit, but nothing that you're going to notice looking in the engine bay. A lot of engines aren't mounted in the middle for various reasons, including Commodores. So the box fits in there, no worries at all. We've only had to give it a little ding up here, just a bit of tunnel clearance, which is pretty much the same ding you have to put in them to get the RB box out when you want to do a clutch on them. So nothing unusual. Now we'll probably just secure it a bit better and then start working on the engine mounts. So Matt should have them done in probably 25 minutes or so if he doesn't mess around. So we're halfway there.
Matt starts off by mounting the rear of the gearbox first. Matt is using a gearbox mount from a Turbo 400 automatic gearbox and secures it to a piece of 10mm plate which he has bent up into the required shape that he needs. Once it has been tacked into place, it's removed from the car and welded up on the bench. Using cotton reel style engine mounts, Matt has cut up some steam pipe to size and positioned them in between the block and the crossmember. The position and level of the engine is checked one final time before being welded into place.
You got to be patient.
Matt throws his wand at the engine mounts while they are clamped to the bench, and with his wizardry skills, 25 minutes later, the engine is mounted. Next time on the SKID Factory, the LS1 gets treated to some flange and a couple of turbos.
This car belongs to Matt, who is our hookup for on-the-spot flanges. We'll start again.
Yeah.